Okay, so a little bit about SWCTech. We'll go ahead and get started. Sorry, I had some display issues here on my end. I apologize for that. So the event will be auto-recorded, and we will share the event with everyone that may have missed it or if you dropped off, so that will come through via email afterwards. A little bit about SWCTech. We are a managed service provider located in New Berlin, Wisconsin. For those that aren't familiar, that might be new to learning about SWCTech. We've been around for about 18 years, have 30 employees, and we are cybersecurity first. It's in our DNA. It's how we go to market. We've been protecting business systems and data and thwarting against cybercrime for a very long time, and we continue to do so. So we're excited today to co-present with Kaseya, with Max Pruger, to learn more about the CMMC model. And real quick here, I wanted to just touch on, SWCTech's role in that. We are what's called a registered, or an RPO, a registered provider organization. So registered provider organizations are required to be registered in order to help lead on government certification projects to perform specific work. We also are required to have registered practitioners, in which we do in our case. So we have some of those folks that sit on our team that do some of the work. But we're the specialists to help achieve some of those certifications if your organization needs that. There's also something called an RP, which is a registered practitioner, which I just mentioned. They deliver non-certified advisory service informed only by basic training on the CMMC standard. So just to be clear, so I can re-articulate that and kind of frame it, the RPOs and RPs in the CMMC ecosystem provide advice, consulting, recommendations to their clients. And that's something that SWCTech does offer. We are the implementers and the consultants, but we do not actually conduct the CMMC assessments. So any reference to non-certified service are only referring to the fact that an RPO is not authorized to conduct a certified CMMC assessment. So hopefully that all makes sense for everybody. And then I did want to actually introduce our speaker today, which is Max Pruger. He is on the webinar with us here. So Max has been a pioneer in the managed service industry since the late 1990s. He currently serves as a general manager of compliance manager for Kaseya, and is responsible for Kaseya's compliance go-to-market strategy. Max, thanks for joining us and hanging out with us on the webinar today. Sorry for the rocky start, everybody. But Max, if you want to share your screen and take over the presentation, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. And by the way, your explanation of RP and RPO totally made sense to me, so I appreciate it.
That's good to hear.
So in order to share, it's saying that you have to stop share. Oh, actually, something's being shared. So let me see if I can replace you here.
Thank you.
All right, and it looks like I should be shared. If you can validate that that's the case, we should be good.
I see it. That's correct.
All right, fantastic. So I'll move this over here a little bit. So for the sake of time, I'm going to skip over kind of my information. As you said, I'm the general manager of compliance manager here at Kaseya. Again, I've been in the kind of IT MSP world for about 20 some odd years. And so I lead the entire go-to-market strategy for our compliance manager business unit within the Kaseya organization. And what we're going to do is talk about the CMMC and probably more importantly right now, the interim rule. And I'll go into specific details on what that means. So from an agenda perspective, I'm going to explain how we got CMMC and what the requirements are today, an overview of the DFARS interim rule. Based on time, I'm going to do a really quick demo of the software. So if you were to come on board with SWCTech, the access to the software that you will have. And then finally, I do want to save enough time for Q&A at the end. So usually we get a lot of questions. And if you do have questions, please post them in the chat log or the Q&A log. And with whatever time we have left over at the end, we will do our best to answer as many as possible. So when it comes to the CMMC and interim rule requirements, oops, that is interesting. Okay, so CMMC Explained. Probably I should step back a little bit. All right, so yeah, let me move there. What this kind of goes back to 2010. The president had an executive order back in 2010 that effectively said that we've got about 300,000 DoD supply chain contractors. There's over 1 million DoD supply chain contracts, and because of that, we as a DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, need to do a much better job of securing the data. And really there's two types of data. There's what's called FCI, so federal contract information. And effectively that means is if you have a federal contract, then congratulations, you have FCI, so you're responsible for protecting your FCI. And there's also what's called CUI, controlled unclassified information. And so that's really what we as the DIB have to do a better job of protecting. And so with CMMC, it is an independent certification in order to get get certified for your CMMC particular level. And this was really created due to disregard for current requirements. And what that means is, again, in 2010, there was an executive order. There was a new DFARS clause, which I'll go into more details. And so pretty much every DoD supply chain contract was going to have a DFARS clause on it. It's 7012. And if you have a contract that has that clause on it, what it says is that you must comply with what's called the NIST 800-171 110 controls. And so as part of that, by 2017 or so, roughly 90% of DFARS contract had that clause in it. And by 2019, the Department of Defense decided to audit a bunch of DoD contractors to see if they were fully complying with those 110 controls. And despite the fact that a lot of the contractors were claiming they were, they had about a 90% failure rate. And if you're a small contractor, don't feel bad. It wasn't just the small contractors, it was the large contractors as well. So they audited 10 prime contractors, and they also had about a 90% failure rate as well. So because of that, the DoD came back and said, we can't do a self-attestation if we have a 90% failure rate. And as such, what we're going to do is we're going to come out with a certification program, and that's how CMMC came on board. So CMMC started the implementation, quote unquote, now, and it is expected to be a 5-year rollout process. So it is starting off very, very slowly. And over the next 5 years, they will add CMMC to effectively every DoD contract that's out there. This is so weird. I think I'm having some issues here on my end too, but sorry for the technical difficulties. I'm just going to go through all of these slides here. But as far as CMMC goes, there are 5 levels. They are based off of NIST 800-171. The primary levels that we, when I say we, kind of the smaller DIB, the subcontractors have to deal with are levels 1 through 3. Level 1 is for any organization that has FCI. So as I mentioned, if you have a federal contract, congratulations, you have FCI. And so you're going to have to meet the level 1 requirements, and it is based off of NIST 800-171. NIST 800-171 has 110 controls, and level 1 includes 17 out of those 110. Level 2 is a transition level only, and so it's for getting to level 3, and that's 73 out of the 110 controls. And then level 3 is for any organization that has CUI, and that includes the full 110 NIST 800-171 controls plus 20 more for a full 130 controls. So because this is going to start off slowly, on September 29th of last year, the government came out and said, hey, it's going to take us 5 years to roll out CMMC. We're only going to start with 15 contracts for all of 2021. So in the interim, we're going to pass what we're calling an interim rule. And what the interim rule says is that starting on effectively December 1st of last year, so this is in effect today, for any government organization or supply chain contractor that wants to be eligible for a new contract, then what they're going to have to do is meet the interim rule requirements, which means that they're going to have to score their existing 110 NIST 800-171 controls, so their compliance with those controls using a government provided scoring rubric. Once they score themselves, then they must create what's called an SSP, a system security plan. And then for every missing control, they must create what's called a POAM, a plan of action and milestones. And I'll show you some examples of that in a second. So, it really is meant to be a stopgap. So it's meant to get us from where we are today or where we were back in September of last year to full rollout of the CMMC requirements. So it could be 3-4 years, but right now, all of those requirements are required today. Once you have your score, you actually have to publish it in a government website. And and you have to do that in order to be eligible for any future contracts. So because of that, there's a lot of confusion right now among contractors, specifically what they have to do. And again, hopefully this is going to clarify those things. And that's why you can work with someone like SWCTech to clarify those things for you. So as far as the DFAR contract goes, yeah, actually, I apologize. Something's really going on with my PowerPoint. So I'm going to restart PowerPoint real quick because it's just doing some weird things here for me. So let me just pause for a second.
Yeah, we'll take that opportunity. If anyone, so it looks like there's some folks in the room. If anyone has a question so far, if you want to post that to the Q&A or the chat, we'd be happy to see if we can field any while Max is reopening PowerPoint. And otherwise, Max, too, if that's giving you some problems, maybe I can share the PowerPoint from my end.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what's going on with the PowerPoint here because I went through the whole thing beforehand, but for some reason it's just, yeah, it's not. Okay, well, I think it's doing the same thing as it is now, so it's not rendering correctly, and I don't want to reboot my entire machine, so that's okay. We'll go through this process here, and hopefully it'll be okay. So my PowerPoint is very strange. Every once in a while, I'll go and reformat a lot of things right before we do a demo. So yeah, we'll kind of go through this. So like I said, it was the 2010 executive order. It is the 7012 clause. So look through your contracts. Usually it's about 70, 80 pages down. But if you see 252.204-7012, then you are subject to the NIST 800-171 controls. There's a lot of requirements there. One of the things that I do point out is that if you have any type of incident or breach, you have 72 hours to actually report that. And a lot of DoD supply chain contractors don't even realize that they have this in one of their contracts. So again, spend some time and look through your contracts and see if you've got that 7012 clause in it. As I mentioned, about 87% of DoD contracts had that clause included by 2017. So if you do have a DoD contract, the likelihood is that you've got that clause in there. And then, as I mentioned, it's there to protect your federal contract information. So, as I mentioned as well, there's about 1 million DoD contracts out there, and there's over 300,000 DoD supply chain contracts today, and those are obviously continuing to grow. So what is controlled unclassified information? There's a lot of content here. I won't go through all of these, but this is effectively, it applies to just about every piece of data that you have inside of that federal contract. So privacy information, tax information, law enforcement, financial information. I've got a couple of DoD supply chain contractors, and one of them, they literally make a lock for a fighter jet, and so they really don't have any information on the fighter jet themselves, but that one little lock that they put for when the door closes and it comes down, that's federal. That's actually considered CUI. It's controlled unclassified information because it's a fighter jet and there's weapons associated with that. So again, understand what's included in that CUI. Obviously nuclear information, procurement, acquisition, and so on. What I saw actually back in September of last year, Katie Arrington, who was the former CISO for the Department of Defense, she claimed that most contracts would be FCI. So she said the vast majority of DoD supply chain contractors would only have to meet level 1. But I can tell you since then, in my experience, it's almost exclusively just about every DoD supply chain contractor I talk to has been told that they do have CUI and they're going to have to be level 3. So in my personal opinion, I think the vast majority of DoD supply chain contractors out there are going to have to meet the level 3 CMMC requirements. So you have to identify how you're impacted. Obviously the simple questions are, do you work on any federal contracts as a prime or subcontractor? And there are flow down requirements. So you do not have to have a direct DoD supply chain contract, but if you're working as a subcontractor for Boeing or Raytheon or Lockheed or McDonnell Douglas or any of those other ones, check the fine print. And once again, check to see if you've got that 252.204, that 7012 clause. And it specifically will say something like safeguarding covered defense information and cyber incident reporting for the protection of the DoD CUI. When it comes to NIST 800-171, there are 14 security control families. And as I mentioned, there are 110 controls. So each control family here has a certain number of controls inside of that family. And you've got to meet those requirements in order to adhere to that 7012 clause. And eventually, once you go get certified for CMMC, you're going to have to meet all those requirements for that CMMC level as well. So as I said, here's the interim rule requirements. You must do a self-assessment of all 110 controls in NIST 800-171, and you must use the government-provided scoring rubric. So each control has a different weight. That weight can range from anywhere from -1 to -5, and a perfect score is 110. For every control that's missing, you subtract the weighted score for that control, and then you'll have a final DoD assessment score. Once you have that score, you must create what's called a system security plan. And then for every missing control, you must create what's called a plan of action and milestones. Once you have those 3 documents, you then take the score only and you're going to upload it into a government website. And that website is called SPRS. And you must have a score published in that SPRS website to be eligible for any future contracts as of December of last year. So once again, this is in place today. If you want to go bid on a contract, you must have a score published. And last I heard, it's taken them still about 30 to 60 days to actually publish a score. So if your goal is to try to get a new DoD supply chain contract, sometime next month, then you want to get that score submitted because it may take 30, 60 days before that score is actually published. And so therefore, if you're not in that database, you're not eligible to get any new contracts. And the other thing is that these are subject to DoD audit. So every single month there is a town hall, and in that town hall they have said that technically you can upload whatever score you like. However, they are auditing those scores. If they don't believe that that score is accurate, that's when they will ask you for supporting documentation, and that's where you're going to have to provide your SSP and your plan of action and milestones. And with that, if you publish a score that you cannot justify, there is pretty significant enforcement. So the first one is the False Claims Act. This is huge. The False Claims Act, for those who don't know, goes all the way back to the Civil War. So it goes all the way back to contractors during the Civil War were going to Congress and showing them these really nice uniforms that were nicely stitched and nice tents and so on. They would get the contract and they would just deliver junk. And so actually Abraham Lincoln went back and said that we need to solve that. And so Congress passed what's called the False Claims Act. And what that means is that if you are subject to the False Claims Act and you're found that guilty, you actually can be fined up to 3 times whatever the contract value is. So if you've got $1 million contract and you get sued under the False Claims Act, then you can be fined up to $3 million. In addition to that, and this is probably even more significant, is that you're going to be liable to the prime contractor as well. So you could potentially lose your existing contract. You could be sued under breach of contract laws. And then finally, the biggest one is that you could be banned from any future contract. So if you are a DoD supply chain contractor and that's your entire business, if you're banned from any future contracts, whether it's for 3, 5 years or unlimited, that could change your entire business. So there are consequences to publishing a score that is not accurate. So you want to try to be accurate and thorough as much as possible. So what do these things look like? As I mentioned, you start with a top score of 110 for every control that's missing. As you can see, some here, some are -1, some are -3, some are -5. You will then subtract that score from your starting 110 with the interim rule, there is no partial credit. Either you have the control or you don't. So if it's a -5 and you don't have it, you pretty much subtract -5. And there's a slight exception to that. I won't go into all the details, but for the most part, again, you either have it or you don't. Also, negative scores are possible. And in fact, not only are they possible, but it's very, very common. I've seen a lot of negative scores. In fact, I was doing a demo for a large DoD supply chain contractor, and they told me that they scored 80, and I was like, wow, that's really impressive. I don't usually see a score that is that high. And I said, well, how did you get 80? And they said, well, we started at 110, we were missing 30 controls, so we subtracted 30, and therefore we got an 80. And I looked at them and said, yeah, it doesn't work that way. They didn't realize that there were different weights for each control. And I told them, unless you were super lucky and every control that you were missing was a -1, I'm pretty sure your score was lower than 80. So we sat down and we actually rescored them using the required weights, and they went from an 80 to a 4. So luckily they weren't negative, but again, they thought they were 80, and when we scored them correctly, they went all the way down to a 4. And obviously, if you've got all your controls met, then a perfect score with no deductions remains 110. This is kind of what it looks like. It's required with your self score. So this is your system security plan. You've got to put this together. So every control you've got to identify, provides implementation details, and it uses the control coding references that are required in NIST 800-171. And again, I'll show you examples of how we simplified this whole process for you. So here's kind of what a finished example is going to look like. So system environment, control 2.1 and 2.2. So it includes all the information that you need. And this is exactly what the controls will look like. So different controls have different requirements, but you'll identify whether it's implemented, whether it's planned to be implemented, or whether it's not applicable. Usually not applicable is, I'll just say it's not applicable, but there are definitely some controls. So there'll be questions about wireless access. So if you don't have wireless access in your environment, then it's not applicable. But more often than not, it's either implemented or it's planned to be implemented. So when it comes to the POAM, for each control not fully implemented, you must identify the control number, state the weaknesses or deficiencies, describe the plan of action to implement. You must provide milestones and dates of completion, as well as funding. You must define this for all missing and incomplete controls. And then, as I mentioned, once you have your score, your SSP, and your POAM, then you must upload it to this website. So it's the Supplier's Performance Risk System. Typically, it's referred to as SPRS. And so you would actually upload your score there. And like I said, it takes, from what I've seen, it's been about 30 to 60 days to actually get it published. And if you do prefer just to send them an email, you can send an encrypted email to this email address right here. In my experience, if you send an email, it's taken a little bit longer for them to actually verify the information and publish it as well, but that is an option. So with that, I'm going to do a quick demo of the product. And before I do, just compliance in general, let me move this out of the way in case you can't see it. I like to say compliance is about the 2 Ds, data and documentation. So what we do from a software perspective is simplify that process using really 4 key components. And the first one is all around the data side. Because we are a software solution, SWCTech will install the software in your environment. It's going to scan the environment, and it's going to bring back somewhere around 40 to 80% and automate 40 to 80% of the manual labor required to gather all the technical data. And if you've ever done any type of compliance, if you've actually scored your existing NIST 800-171 controls, you probably know it takes a lot of labor to bring back all of that data. So we're going to make you a lot more efficient in that process. However, not only do we audit the data, but we validate it's accurate. And that's really the key. There's lots of checklist products out there. You can go to the NIST Cybersecurity Frameworks website or NIST 800-171 and download their spreadsheets. It's this really long, arduous spreadsheet and try to fill out all the forms and check all the boxes. The problem is that if you do get audited, or for CMMC, when you do get audited, what the auditors are typically going to perform is what they refer to as an under the skin scan, which means that they'll actually validate that what you've put in your documentation matches what you have in your environment. And obviously, a large portion of the time, those things don't match. So kind of the whole reason we have CMMC today is because companies were doing a self-attestation when they were getting a new contract. they were checking the box that was saying, yep, we're following all of the 110 NIST 800-171 controls. And as I mentioned, when they actually got audited, there was a 90% failure rate. So because we're software, we're going to audit the environment, we're going to validate the accuracy of the data, and so we will produce accurate and thorough results. So that should hopefully make it much easier when you finally go through that certification process. Once we audit the data, we then map it to a step-by-step task list. So while Eric and his team have actually gone through the process and taken those extra steps to become an RP, registered practitioner, and an RPO, so they can definitely help you with this process. The nice thing is you don't have to be a CMMC expert. So as you're answering the controls, as you're working with Eric and his team, again, you don't have to be an expert. You literally just follow the process. As you complete the tasks, you're getting closer and closer to adhering to those compliance guidelines. Once you've completed all the tasks, then we address that second D, which is documentation. So we will actually produce the scoring report, the SSP, the POAM for the interim rule, and the required documentation for the CMMC compliance as well. And then finally, everything is collaborative. So that means that you don't have to do everything yourself. Eric doesn't have to do everything himself. So you can work together. This is a collaborative process. The more that you're engaged in the process, the higher your chance of passing that certification, the more likely to be engaged, and so on. So every single portion of the software is collaborative. You can assign each other tasks, you can work together so that one individual is not responsible for trying to put it all together themselves. So with that said, like I said, I'm gonna do a really quick demo of the product. Keep our fingers crossed from a technical perspective that the software and everything is just going to work, absolutely. So so if you can still see my screen, it is a SaaS-based portal. You would have a login to this portal. Production environments are two-factor authenticated. Obviously, this is just a test environment. For CMMC purposes, this is hosted in the AWS FedRAMP Moderate Cloud, which is sufficient for CMMC up to level 3 from everything that we've researched and been told. But for the most part, you would have your own specific site. So here's a sample CMMC site. I'm about halfway through, so I got a nice little overview of what's going on in the environment, so you can see my progress. Maybe a little less than halfway, so about maybe 40% of the way through. I already have some issues that have popped up during the scan, so I've got things like unsupported operating systems, and I can click on those, and it shows me in my environment. I've got 3 machines. Here's a machine name, the IP address, and the operating system that are no longer supported, and so we can go and address these risks before we actually go certify ourselves or attempt certification. But yeah, as you can see in my environment, I have a decent number of issues already identified here. But with that, most of the time it's just spent in the to-do list, and after Eric and his team install the software, they'll start the scan, and then you'll see tasks start popping up. And when it comes to the tasks, pretty much there's 2 types of rules, I would say, across pretty much all of these compliance standards, including CMMC. So there are technical rules, which are security rules, and then you've got your privacy policy and procedure rules. So when it comes to the security rules, we'll create security or technical type worksheets, and they're pretty straightforward, and they will all look very consistent across or within the module itself. So one of the requirements for CMMC is you must identify every single user account in your environment. What type of an account is it, and what type of access it should have. So when it comes to the technical worksheets, the software will always pull some portion of data automatically. So we're going to pull all this data that you see here automatically, and then some portion needs to be filled in. So once we pull this data, somebody will log in and say, yep, I know Abby Pacheco. Abby is an employee, third party, former employee, service account, but we'll say Abby's an employee. Abby, like most employees, is working from home, so Abby does have remote access to the environment, but we'll say Abby's a relatively low-level employee, and therefore Abby does not have access to CUI, versus somebody like an administrator, most likely they would. So again, really straightforward. You can work together, you can assign people tasks. As I mentioned, it is collaborative, so on the top of every worksheet, there's an Invite Others button. So you can click Invite Others, add new expert. Anybody, internal or external, can be a subject matter expert. You can click Add Expert. They'll get an email that says, hey, you've been assigned a task. Please log in and help me fill this stuff in. So once again, if you've got a large environment or maybe multiple offices and you've got an office manager at each office, you can assign them tasks. They can log in and help you fill out the details. But that's pretty much what the technical worksheets will look like. And there's a bunch of those. So you've got Asset inventory, this is admittedly the most comprehensive document, but it is required. You must identify every single asset on the environment. So once again, we're going to pull all this data automatically through our scans, and then somebody will log in and justify those assets and what they're doing on that particular environment. In addition to that, obviously the first time you fill this out, it is going to take you the longest. However, once you do this once, you never have to start from scratch again. So every month the software automatically rescans, it'll send administrative alerts, and it'll alert you on any changes in the environment. So if the software finds 3 more assets or 2 more users, you'll just get alerted on that. You'll just have to come in and address the required information just for those additional assets or users. So you're not doing it all from scratch. And part of CMMC is that once you get certified, the certification is valid for 3 years. However, as I said, if you listen to these town halls, they have said repeatedly that you must maintain your compliance. Actually, they call it continuous compliance specifically for CMMC. And continuous compliance means that at any point in time, both the Department of Defense as well as your prime contractor can come in and request a spot check, and you must have updated evidence of compliance documentation to show them. And they've also said, don't expect that you're going to get something on a Friday afternoon. You'll be able to print up some documents over the weekend and turn it in. So they are going to be monitoring, and they're going to be ensuring that you're maintaining your compliance throughout the course of your CMMC certification. So with that, that's what the software is going to help with as well. So again, there's lots of those technical worksheets. There's antivirus worksheets, external information systems. We'll even do an external vulnerability scan. So to be clear, this is not a full penetration test or anything, but we do what's required. So you would provide your public IPs. We would scan those. We will do a SQL injection attempt, an SSH connection attempt. We'll identify any open ports. If there are any ports that are open, we'll list those, and then somebody will log in and justify why those ports are open. But again, that's pretty much what the technical worksheets will look like. And then when it comes to the questionnaires, we're going to literally walk you through every single control question. So access control is the first control family. So here's your access control questionnaire, and there's control number 1. So you'll see here's your actual CMMC control. So access control.1.001. And because CMMC is based off of NIST 800-171, we're going to do a crosswalk and give you your NIST 800-171 control as well. From there, we'll just ask the required questions. Has the company implemented a mechanism to limit information system access to authorized users, processes acting on behalf of authorized users, or devices? And your options for CMMC are typically going to be yes, no, planned, or not applicable. As I mentioned, not applicable is usually not used. So you would either say yes, no, or planned. If you put no or planned, that's going to be identified as a missing control. If you say yes, then it's going to ask you to justify your answer. It's not enough just to say yes. You actually have to be able to prove it so that you don't get sued under the False Claims Act or breach of contract or anything like that. So you would provide that justification there. And you'll notice that every question and every worksheet has 3 little icons. So you can add notes, you can identify the respondent, and then you can also upload supporting documentation. So if Eric and his team have given you supporting documentation or policies and procedures around CMMC, and you already have this documentation, you could just upload it from your computer or from another software product that we own that's as well. But again, it's all stored version maintained within our software. And finally, I mentioned you don't have to be an expert. So if you read this question and you have no clue how to answer it, that's okay. You can click this little show guidance button, and for every question, so you'll see for every question, if you click show guidance, we're going to provide you question specific comments and links and examples and content and so on to help you answer these questions. So again, this is where you don't have to be a CMMC expert. We're going to provide you examples and considerations and so on for every question so that you can come over here and have a better understanding of how to answer these questions. And that's pretty much how the software works. I should point out this is a level 3 assessment. So this is the full 130 controls. If I wanted to do a level 1 or 2, I could just select that and rerun those. But for the most part, again, really straightforward, walk you through the process, gather and automate the collection of all the technical data. And so once all of these tasks turn green, then we're ready to address the second D, which is documentation. So we do produce the required evidence of compliance documentation. When you are ready for your CMMC assessment, these are the type of documents that your assessor is going to ask for. And I'll throw out another acronym because, of course, there's not enough acronyms in both the IT and the compliance world. So as Eric mentioned, they're an RPO. So an RPO can help you with the pre-assessment. They can help you get ready for the certification, but only what's called a C3 PAO, a certified third-party assessment organization or assessor organization, can actually do the certification. So they're going to look for these types of documents. Most likely the first document they're going to ask for is your risk analysis. And so we build this out for you. You do have an overall relative risk score. So on a scale of 0 to 100, we're not doing very well. We have 97 risk, but that's okay. At least I've started. This is my gap analysis. This is my baseline. This is where I'm starting from. And then I have to show, continuous improvement and then eventually continuous compliance. And so from there, every single risk is documented based off of the control. So I've got 38 machines that don't have auto screen lock enabled. Here's my actual CMMC control. Here's my NIST 800-171 control. I've got 27 machines missing lots of patches. User password set to never expire. But you can see I've got 19 pages of multiple risks or missing controls per page. So when they talk about accurate and thorough, these are the type of results that those assessors are looking for. So that's going to be your, let's see if I can move that out of the way. It will not let me move this out of the way. Okay, so we'll go back to here. So that's your risk analysis. There'll be a corresponding treatment plan that just gives you kind of a run book of how to resolve these issues. We will also create what we call an assessor's checklist. And this is going to be a very, very similar process to what an assessor is going to do and look for on your environment. So based off of what type of level you selected. So this is a level 3 assessor's checklist. We're going to go through every domain, level, capability, and practice number, which is your control number, and show you what you have and what you don't have. So just really easy to see. If I'm just trying to get a level 1 assessment, then I can look at this and say, good news, controls 2, 3, and 4, I've met. We've documented, or I've documented that I've met those, but it looks like control 1 is missing. So I documented I don't have it. I have a plan to fix it, and I got to address this one in order to turn it green and put a yes there. So again, if you just wanted level 1, then you would go through every single domain and make sure all your level 1 controls are green. Obviously, this is a level 3, so it's got the full 130 controls. And you can see here, pretty easy to understand what you have, what you don't have, and what you need to build or address in order to get all of these controls green, which is what you need for level 3 before you can actually schedule your certification with the C3 PAO. Okay. All right, so with that, there's also a really long evidence of compliance document. So again, this is typically what the assessors are going to look at. Lots of supporting documentation. So your patch assurance reports, your external vulnerability reports. Every month we'll automatically rescan and we'll create a change summary report. So this will show you changes in the environment. Again, this is what's really important for the continuous compliance requirements. Once you get certified, like I said, here's a change summary report. This will just show you things like users added, subtracted, patches, updates, applications, and so on that have changed on the environment. And then we'll do a monthly risk analysis as well. So hopefully you started at some very low risk here. I was at a 97, so I went to a 94. So definitely not great. Definitely still not ready to do my assessment, or my certification. But I am showing continuous improvement. So I went from 97 to 94, and then all of my outstanding risks are still documented. But I did also go, I think it was 20 some odd pages of risk down to 10 pages worth of risk, so I can check my progress there. All right, and then of course, every single worksheet you fill out is also available as a supporting document. So if you do get audited and they want to see your antivirus verification worksheet, it's here, and then we do break it up based off what's required for level 1s, level 2, and level 3. So it is iterative, but obviously the more levels you go up, the more requirements they are for those particular levels. So that's going to be around the CMMC side. However, as we've talked about, the real requirement today is actually around the interim rule. So in addition to all of the CMMC reports, we do provide the required evidence of compliance documentation for the interim rule. So I mentioned you must score yourself. And so what we do is we build out this report for you. So we'll score your environment, obviously based off of what we scanned, as well as the answers to the questions and controls provided. But here we go. So perfect score is 110. I subtract all my missing controls, so I've got -60. So I have a final DoD assessment score of 50, which, as I said, is not a bad score. It's actually a pretty good score from what I've seen. And this is the number that you would upload to the SPRS website. From there, here's my 14 control families and how I scored in each family. And then every single control is scored based off of the government provided scoring rubric. So some are -3, some are -1, -3, and then some are -5. And if I wanted to, I could add notes in here as well. So here's my full scoring report. So that's part of my justification. I mentioned you've got to create an SSP. So we'll build this out. And this is just a really long aggregate report of pretty much everything that was entered into the system. So all the information that we gathered automatically, all the answers to the control questions, and links to lots and lots of other documents. So if you were to print up all those documents individually, you'd have several hundred pages of documentation. But here you go. So again, information that we gathered automatically, more auto collected information, and then answers to your control questions. So that's all here. And finally, for every missing control, you must have your POAM. So we're going to build this out for you as well. So with the POAM, as I mentioned, you must identify the control family, the requirements, the status, weaknesses, milestones. So pretty much everything you see here, we're building out automatically in the software with the exception of the funding and schedule completion date. So that's obviously something you're going to have to provide, obviously working with Zoetek and their team, but again, we are building out these POAMs. And in my experience, working with lots of DoD consultants, if you try to do this manually, it can literally take you months to build out these reports manually, and we're going to automate a large portion of this process for you. So that's your POAM. And then finally, one other document. This is not required, but we do work with some pretty high-end companies in the Department of Defense. They provided us feedback and said this would be a very valuable document. So this is your scoring supplement. So this is your justification so that you don't have to deal with false claims and breaches or lawsuits or any other stuff. So this is your justification for all the controls that you said you had. So when you provided an answer to the control questions, it asks you to justify your answers. And so this document really is just as an aggregate of those. So if you claim that you met that control, here's the justification you provided. So if the Department of Defense does come back to you, or your prime contractor comes back to you and asks you for proof, this is the reason why you said that you had the answer to that control question. So again, not required, but just a very valuable document. So with that, those are the deliverables. This, compliance is all about documentation. If you did not document it, you did not have it. I can pretty much guarantee that no auditor, no assessor, no attorney is ever going to call you up and ask you to describe your password management plan or your incident response plan to them. They're going to say, send us the required documentation, the policies and procedures, and either you have those or you don't. And so to that point, we provide all this documentation. And last two things, we also do provide you sample policies and procedures as well. So every compliance standard, CMMC is no exception. In fact, they have more, does require policies and procedures. So we do have sample policies and procedures for every single control. You can see this one's about 140 pages long. This is for level 3. So level 1, I think it's only about 40 pages long. But for every single question, so access control .1.001, here's your NIST control. Here's your other requirements, but we do provide you a sample policy and purpose and scope and responsibilities and sanctions and so on for every single one of those controls. These are legal documents. We do encourage you to have them reviewed, but once you're comfortable, you sign it, you date it, you upload it into the software, and then everything's stored, versioned, and maintained within the software. So we do give you, again, sample reports for every control. And in addition to that, every single compliance standard out there, they all overlap. Every one of them requires like a password management plan, an incident response plan, and a business continuity plan. So we also give you about 12.5 additional planning documents. So these are going to be more in-depth responses to the different control questions. So here's a sample pandemic response plan. And like I said, just more details. So you've got a nice overview, purpose, scope, policy, and so on, compliance, things like that. So once again, you can sign it, date it, you upload it into the software, and that way you have your policy documents as well. So with that, that is the full list of all the different documentation and controls that we support. And we will bring it back to here. Open it up for any additional questions. So I think we've got roughly 6 minutes. So because we had a little late start, I apologize. We were hoping to leave about 10 minutes for questions, but glad we got through the technical demo without any, technical issues. So I do apologize. I don't know what's going on with PowerPoint. I'll reboot my machine as soon as this is done. It was kind of rendering things incorrectly. But with that said, hopefully this was valuable. You learned some information that you can take back and leverage to build out your business, to get more contracts, and to actually meet the requirements so that you can do the interim rule today and then eventually get your CMMC certification once those start rolling out more en masse.
No, great job covering the topic and going into some of the details there. We do have 2 questions that came through. Okay. The first one said, we do not have a we do not hold DoD contracts, but we provide equipment to companies who do have DoD contracts. Does CMMC certification apply to us? I think the answer is yes.
So yes, I mean, well, the answer to every compliance question, even if it's yes or no, is it depends in a 45-minute answer. But so CMMC does have flow down requirements. So if you have a contract or if you have a customer that is part of the DoD supply chain, almost certainly you are also part of the DoD supply chain. Now, the question is, do you have FCI, Federal Contract Information, or do you have access to CUI, Controlled Unclassified Information? My guess is that you most likely, I mean, again, if you have a contract with this customer, if you're providing them anything, you look at your contract, see if that 7012 clause is in there. And if it's not, just on the safe side, ask your DoD supply chain contractor, because like I said, there are flow down requirements, and pretty much anybody that's part of the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, is subject to CMMC.
Great answer. And another question that came through, and I was trying to do a little bit of digging there, but someone was asking for the price of the CMMC compliance manager through the rapid fire tools. That's something that I know SWCTech, we have a license for that we help companies with. I don't know that that's something that is open for everyone to just pay for. So I wanted you to answer that question as well.
Correct. So as far as compliance manager goes, I mean, here for this purposes, I'm happy to present, through SWCTech. They have purchased the product. So if you are interested in purchasing the product directly, then I would say to talk to Eric and his team, and they can work with you on potentially purchasing it directly or leveraging their existing implementation and giving you access to that.
Good to go. Thank you for clarifying. I don't see any other questions that have come through just yet. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for just 2 minutes here. We have about 3 minutes left to go. So give me just a moment here to pull up what I have left on the PowerPoint. Hang with me here. Skipping through all of the slides, just takes a second. A lot of clicking.
That just gives everybody a chance to ask more questions.
Exactly, that's a good point. All right, so go ahead and share that. I did want to let everyone know that is still in attendance. If you're local to the Metro Milwaukee area, I know a lot of our clients are. We are doing an in-person Brain Food event, the first one in quite some time. It'll be hosted at Maggiano's, Little Italy, North Mayfair Road, Wauwatosa. And that's going to be on August 4th from 2 to 4 p.m. If you do decide that you want to sign up for that, it's available through our website, swctech.com. You can go to the resources page and register for the event through Eventbrite. But we are going to be offering free food to take home for your family. It's really good food. It's very hearty portions. And we're going to be covering the adoption of Teams Voice. So if Teams Voice is something that you're looking to learn more about, or if your existing voice solution is if the contract is coming to an end, if you're just trying to analyze this and approach it, we're going to cover that in great detail. And we're also going to have some demonstration equipment there, some of the hard devices that work with Teams and Microsoft. So anyone that wants to register for that, we'd encourage you to do so. We'd be happy to see you in person as well. And with that, that takes us to about 2 minutes left. I didn't see any other questions come through. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and end the presentation of the live broadcast. And we want to thank everybody for hanging in there with us through the technical difficulties in the beginning. And we will be sending out some follow-up information tomorrow with the live recording, as well as a survey for how we did. So thank you so much.